In this video, I'm going to cover examples of methods to ensure integrity of data, or more specifically, methods to detect data errors. Now, ensuring data integrity involves being able to detect errors in data, damage to it, or corruption, either by software or hardware failures. You can do that in multiple ways. You could do it by looking at the data in whole, but that's most often either impossible or infeasible. Sometimes you're getting the data from somewhere else, so you don't have any original data to compare with, or the data is so large and extensive that it would take you too long to compare. The solution is to calculate some kind of signature or a fingerprint with a predefined function. Parity bit is the simplest form of detecting errors, and they're usually only used on smaller communication protocols like 8-bit protocols with obviously 8 bits of data. The method used by parity is to basically just count the number of ones in the data and add either 0 or 1 to the data, indicating if it's either even or odd parity. So to take an example, if I were going to send some data to a colleague, first we agree on either using even or odd parity. Let's say we agree on even. Then I take the data and count the number of ones in it. Take, for example, the third row there. There are 4 ones, and we have agreed on using even parity. So to ensure that there are still even number of ones, I add a 0 to the data and send that off to my colleague. And when he receives it, he then counts the number of ones, sees it's even still, and he can be relatively sure that the data hasn't been corrupted in transit. If he were to count an odd number of ones when he receives it, keep in mind we did agree on even parity. The parity bit included, then he would have known that the data had been compromised, either in transit or by his or my handling of it. So that's parity bit, the simplest way to detect errors in the simplest data. And parity bit is a special case of what is referred to as checksums. A checksum function will convert the original data into something smaller that can be compared to another checksum quite easily to see if they are the same. Checksum functions are usually fairly simple and mainly serve the purpose of checking the integrity of the data, as the checksum acts as kind of a fingerprint for the data. A common usage is to check if an input has been correctly entered. For example, on a website where you're providing your social security number, or if you're scanning barcodes or scanning ISBN numbers, or manually entering any of those into a form. There will be a single number or a block of numbers within those data that serve as the check digit or check numbers. Those are calculated with checksum functions and compared to the expected checksum. If they met, there was no error. If not, the data was incorrectly entered into the form. Now, hash functions are related to checksums, as in their output is often referred to as a checksum, or hash value, or a digest, digital fingerprint, for example. They map the data to a fixed sized value, although they might not always map the whole data depending on their purpose. A simple hash function might, for example, just take the data and calculate some integer from it. This example is not very useful, to be honest. It just maps names to a set of numbers ranging from 0 to 15, which for most purposes is far too few hash values, As you see, this particular hash function has a collision, where Sandra D and John Smith have the same hash value. The ideal hash function has three properties. First off, it will be really easy to calculate the hash value for any given data, whether it's a single word input or a whole book. Secondly, it should be nearly impossible with any computational power to reverse the hash value into the input. That is, given the hash value, you shouldn't be able to get the source data. Thirdly, the hash values should be uniformly distributed. That is, it should be highly unlikely that two different inputs would have the same hash value. The hash functions that have these properties properly implemented are used as cryptographic hash functions, which we will cover in the cryptography part.